ഏതാനും വെബിനാറുകൾ സമൂഹത്തെ ബാധിക്കുന്ന ചില വിഷയങ്ങളെ സംബന്ധിച്ചുള്ള വെബിനാറുകളും നടന്നു. ഇന്ന് സഭയുടെ വിദേശ ഇടവകകൾ സാധ്യതകളും വെല്ലുവിളികളും എന്ന വിഷയത്തെ ആസ്പദമാക്കിയാണ് ഈ മീറ്റിംഗ് ക്രമീകരിച്ചിട്ടുള്ളത്. ഈ മീറ്റിംഗ് മോഡറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ബഹുമാന്യനായ റവറൻ VM മാത്യു അച്ഛനാണ്. അച്ഛനൊരു മുഖവുര ആവശ്യമുള്ള വ്യക്തിത്വമല്ല. കോട്ടയം മാർത്തോമാ തിയോളജിക്കൽ സെമിനാരിയിലെ അധ്യാപകനായ അച്ഛൻ സഭയുടെ നവീകരണ ധാരയിൽ സഭ നിരന്തരം ചരിക്കണമെന്ന് ഉറക്കെ പറയുന്ന ഒരു പട്ടക്കാരനാണ്. സഭ നേരിടുന്ന കാലഘട്ടത്തിന്റെ വെല്ലുവിളികളെ പറ്റി തീർത്തും ബോധവാനാണ് അച്ഛൻ. സഭയ്ക്കുള്ളിൽ നിന്നും പ്രതികരിക്കേണ്ട വേദികളിൽ സമയാസമയങ്ങളിൽ നിർഭയമായ നിലപാടുകൾ എടുക്കുവാനും അത് വ്യക്തമായി പറയാനും യാതൊരു ചങ്കൂറ്റക്കുറവുമില്ലാത്ത ഒരു പട്ടക്കാരനാണ് ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട റവറൻ VM മാത്യു അച്ഛൻ. നമ്മുടെ ഇന്നത്തെ വെബിനാർ അച്ഛൻ മോഡറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഏറ്റവും സന്തോഷകരമായ വസ്തുതയാണ്. മാർത്തോമാ യുവജന സഖ്യത്തിന്റെ അസിസ്റ്റന്റ് സെക്രട്ടറി ആയിട്ട് അച്ഛൻ പ്രവർത്തിക്കുന്ന കാലഘട്ടത്തിലാണ് കേരളത്തിന് പുറത്തുള്ള യുവജനങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ബാംഗ്ലൂരിൽ ഒരു ബാഹ്യ കേരള യൂത്ത് സെന്റർ പണിയുന്നതിന് ഇടയായി തീർന്നത്. നോർത്ത് അമേരിക്കയിൽ അച്ഛൻ ആയിരിക്കുന്ന കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ നോർത്ത് അമേരിക്കൻ സ്റ്റുഡൻസ് ചാപ്ലനായിട്ട് അച്ഛൻ്റെ സേവനങ്ങൾ ഏറ്റവും വിലമതിക്കത്തക്കതാണ്. ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട VM മാത്യു അച്ഛനെ നമ്മളുടെ ദർശനവേദിയുടെ പേരിലും ഈ മീറ്റിംഗിൽ പങ്കെടുക്കുന്ന ഏവരുടെയും പേരിൽ ഞാൻ ഹാർദവമായി മോഡറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ആദരപൂർവ്വം അച്ഛനെ മോഡറേഷന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ക്ഷണിക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നു.
Thank you, Mr. P. Sunny, respected Achins, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. It is indeed a joy for me to be the moderator of this session where we discuss the diaspora parishes, possibilities and challenges. ഇത് ചില നാളുകളായി ഈ ഫോറത്തിൽ ഒരു വെർച്വൽ സ്റ്റഡി ഗ്രൂപ്പായി നിലകൊള്ളുന്ന ഒരു ഗ്രൂപ്പാണിത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ കാലഘട്ടത്തിലെ പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട വിഷയങ്ങൾ ഈ വേദിയിൽ ചർച്ചാ വിഷയമാകുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതും വളരെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ്. മാർത്തോമാ സഭ ഒരു കൊച്ചു സഭയായി ഞാൻ സാധാരണ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത് കണ്ണുനീരിൽ തുടങ്ങിയ ഒരു സഭയാണിത്. കണ്ണുനീരിൽ തുടങ്ങിയ ഒരു സഭ വളർന്ന് പന്തലിച്ച് wherever the Marthomites migrated, they planted the church too. അങ്ങനെ സഭ ഇന്ന് ലോകത്തിന്റെ എല്ലാ ഭാഗങ്ങളിലേക്കും അത്തരത്തിൽ വളർന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞിരിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ സന്തോഷകരമായ കാര്യമാണ്. When the church is replanted in these continents, സഭയുടെ വളർച്ചയിൽ കാലാകാലങ്ങളിൽ നേതൃത്വം നൽകാൻ അഭിമന്യ തിരുമേനിമാരും പട്ടക്കാരും അൽമായ നേതൃത്വവും ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതും വളരെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ്. അങ്ങനെ വളർന്ന ഈ സഭ ഇന്ന് കേരളത്തിന് വെളിയിലും ഇന്ത്യക്ക് വെളിയിലും ഒരു വലിയ സമൂഹമായിരിക്കുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതും വളരെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ്. When we had the first generation moved to different places, the church was growing. Church became a blessing to the first generation Marthomites. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു തലമുറയ്ക്ക് ഈ സഭയുടെ കൂട്ടായ്മയും സഭയുടെ അത്തരത്തിലുള്ള വളർച്ചയും അനുഭവിക്കാനും അതിൽ പങ്കാളികളാകാനും ദൈവം അവസരം നൽകി. When the first and the second and third generation were born to Marthoma families, we were started facing issues one after another. ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ ശുശ്രൂഷയുടെ ഭൂരിഭാഗവും കേരളത്തിന് വെളിയിൽ ചിലവഴിച്ച ഒരാളാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ കേരളത്തിന് വെളിയിലേക്ക് മൂവ് ചെയ്ത, അവിടെ താമസിക്കുന്ന, അവിടെ വളർന്നു വന്ന പല തലമുറകളെ ഞാൻ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെ കാണുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ ഈ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ വളരെ സംഗതമായി മാർത്തോമാ സഭ ചിന്തിക്കേണ്ട വിഷയം ഡയസ്പൊറ പാരിഷസ്, ദി പോസിബിലിറ്റീസ് ആൻഡ് ചാലഞ്ചസ് എന്നുള്ളത് തന്നെയാണ്. ഇന്ന് ഈ വേദി അതിനായി ഉപയോഗിക്കപ്പെടുമ്പോൾ ലോകത്തിന്റെ വിവിധ ഭാഗങ്ങളിലുള്ള our church members from the different time zones have come together to discuss this issue. ഇതൊരു ഒഫീഷ്യൽ ഫോറം അല്ല, ഇത് വളരെ ഇൻഫോർമൽ ആയ ഒരു പഠന ഗ്രൂപ്പ് മാത്രമാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ ഇവിടെ നമ്മൾ പങ്കുവയ്ക്കുന്ന വിഷയങ്ങൾ പങ്കുവയ്ക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ അതിൻ്റെ എല്ലാ ഗൗരവവും എല്ലാ വെല്ലുവിളികളും മുന്നിൽ കണ്ടുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെയാണ് നമ്മൾ പങ്കുവയ്ക്കുന്നത്. ഈ പങ്കുവയ്ക്കലിൽ സഭയുടെ നന്മയാണ് നമ്മുടെ ലക്ഷ്യം. മാർത്തോമാ സഭ നിരന്തരമായി നവീകരിക്കപ്പെട്ടുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. മാർത്തോമാ സഭ അതിലെ എല്ലാ അംഗങ്ങൾക്കും ഒരു അമ്മയായി അപ്പനായി ആയിരിക്കുന്ന ഇടങ്ങളിൽ ആയിത്തീരുക എന്നുള്ളതാണ് ഈ കാലഘട്ടത്തിന്റെ ആവശ്യം. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ the communities around the world face different issues. അപ്പൊ അതെല്ലാം ഇനി ഫോറത്തിൽ പറയാൻ പറ്റുമോ എന്ന് എനിക്ക് അറിയില്ല. എന്നാൽ I believe that we need a serious discussion on the diaspora parishes. അതിന് ഒരു വേദി ഇന്ന് ഒരുക്കപ്പെടുന്നു എന്ന് മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ. We have 5 people presenting today from different places around the globe. Let me just introduce those presenters. First, we have Mr. George Verghese from Auckland, New Zealand. He is one of the present Sabha Council members. He has been in the diaspora experience for the last 41 years, and he is a founder member in the Marthoma Church in New Zealand. So I welcome Mr. George Verghese to this webinar. Second, I welcome Dr. Usha George from Toronto, Canada. Dr. Usha, now she's working as a professor in Ryerson University and also the academic director of Ryerson Center for Immigration and Settlement. She is a member of Marthoma Church in Toronto. She has been in Canada for quite a long time. She has sociology degrees from Kerala and Chicago. And she completed her PhD from Ahmed Bello University in Nigeria. So we welcome Dr. Usha George to this webinar. Third, we have Mr. Reggie Matthew. He's from Sydney, Australia. He is working in the capacity of research in South Wales University. He has been involving in the ministry of Sydney Marthoma Church and as a Sunday school teacher, as a VBS director in that area, and he is also leading youth groups in Australia. I welcome Dr. Reggie Matthew to this webinar. We have Srimati Suma Chako. She's from Philadelphia, USA. She is the present secretary of Diocesan North American Europe Diocesan Sevilla Sangam. She is giving leadership in different spheres of our church in North America. She is working as an infection control specialist in University Hospital. We welcome Ms. Srimati Suma Chako to this webinar. And finally, we have Mr. Sam George. He's from Chicago, Illinois Global Diaspora Institute. He's working as a global catalyst in Lavsana movement. He is an author of a dozen of books. He has made immense studies on migration, the second generation. So we welcome Dr. Sam George. He's a member of Chicago Marthoma Church we welcome Sam George. So we have these 5 eminent personalities giving us presentations today. So each presenter will be given 15 minutes, and kindly stick on to your allotted time. So that is also important. So I welcome Mr. George Verghese, Auckland, to have his presentation.
Thank you, Achin, for the kind introduction. Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It is Saturday, 3:30 a.m. in New Zealand, but I am excited, wide awake. I just had a very strong coffee. Our moderator, V. Matthew Achin, respected Achins, the organizers of the Darshana Vedi, dear fellow speakers, and various people attending this webinar from different locations. Greetings to all of you in the matchless name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I want to especially thank the organizers for this opportunity to voice our concerns as a diaspora community. This is the first time we are presenting something to a common forum of this sort. All of what I will be presenting is a collective feedback from various members of the congregation. I have summarized a few points of concern that I want to address, which I will share in the following couple of slides. I am aware of the time given to me, and I will try my best to finish within that time. So I have mainly divided this talk into 4 parts. The first one, I will cover the socio-cultural background of New Zealand. Secondly, the development of the Marthoma community in New Zealand. And the third part will be organizational issues and challenges. And the fourth part will be worship, mission, and witnessing issues. Let me share my slide. Hope you can see this. Okay, excellent. New Zealand is situated in the southern hemisphere, South Pacific Ocean. It is a long strip of land of 2,000 kilometers, stretching from north to the southern tip, with a little over 5 million people. We have more sheep than people in New Zealand. New Zealand is advanced into very liberal society over the last 2 centuries. It was the first country to give women the right to vote, that is in 1893, and a country with the highest ranking in effort to take care of the indigenous people. We also have a firm anti-nuclear stand. New Zealand is a multicultural society with 76% Europeans, 14% Maori, and 10% other ethnicities. In the last 2 decades, the country has turned from a Christian majority state to a sort of secular state. Now, only 1/3 of the population identify themselves as Christians, and out of that, only 9% of the total population are churchgoers. However, the core Christian values of honesty, fairness, and equality are widely upheld and practiced. A strong sense of secularism is being inculcated through the educational system. The reason I give this briefing is to highlight the need to educate our children and the development of Marthoma community. New Zealand is relatively informal non-hierarchical, and less materialistic when compared to other jurisdictions. In those aspects, New Zealand is more in line with Scandinavian countries. In corporate or official setup, hardly anyone get addressed by sir or madam, only by first name. To give you a background of the development of the Marthoma community in New Zealand, we were the first to hold a Malayalam communion service in New Zealand soil way back in November 2002 by late Zacharias Marthiopoulos Thirumeni. All Malayalis attended the service. Subsequently, we have been overtaken by our sister churches like Orthodox, Jacobite, or Catholic churches. It took us another 3 to 4 years to form a Marthoma congregation due to the delay in communication and approvals. We now have approximately 185 families living in different cities and towns, 50 plus youths, and 90 plus children. More than 100 families in Auckland, and rest are based in 7 or 8 other cities or smaller towns around the country. I feel we have many organizational issues that need to be addressed. But I condensed all my concerns into 10 key points. Everyone acknowledges that times have changed, but we don't realize how far behind we are. Generation upon generation have seen changes taking place, and I feel the majority have somehow coped. However, in our ministry, I feel that senior leadership overlooks matters related to overseas parishes because it is a bit more complex. There are several complex and pressing matters that impact the church. Let me just put the second slide. Hope you can see that, yeah. There are several complex and pressing matters that impact our church. Church in diaspora cannot remain as a potted plant. It has to grow in a local soil and bear fruit. The vision of the parish needs to be understood and well supported by our church in a consistent manner. Sometimes decisions take a long time, which results in huge financial impact and lost time. When it comes to overseas posting of HNs, our leaders need to identify suitable candidates purely based on our overseas requirement, not just anyone. HN need to be positive-minded, mission-oriented, multilinguistic, fluent in spoken English, and capable of winning the hearts of the overseas-born children and families. Getting respect is harder when money becomes the objective of their foreign posting. Clergy need to be prepared for foreign posting. I know there is some effort being taken, however, we need to be robust in our efforts. Ideally, they need to be told the expectations, also undergo the specific induction program prior to the arrival. Also, the parish need to be empowered to express their requirements. Another point, we need to have a balanced approach towards traditions and practices. We don't need to ignore our values and traditions. They are unique to us. However, we can't impose them on those not familiar or born overseas. We need to explain why things are done in a certain way, giving solid biblical perspective and willing to let go of not so important matters. Our children need to be strong and grounded in the Word of God, taught in the relevant manner. How do we measure accountability? We all are equally responsible and accountable towards our future generation. That's a very important point. We have had this challenge for a long time. Are we doing our best? Our people here are cultural diverse and need a lot of pastoral care. Our members come from different parts within and outside India. In our own families, as parents, we know our struggles are real and we go through on a daily basis. Open-mindedness and self-awareness are key in providing spiritual care and counseling to our new generation. Our youth come from various backgrounds and go through their own challenges and require a lot of support. This is a serious concern. Another big challenge is geographical distance. That is mainly for New Zealand I'm talking about. Unfortunately, we are at the other end of the world, also so much scattered within the country. I don't think we have any other country currently going through this kind of a scenario. The New Zealand Marthoma Parish has its own unique requirements of the region. We are a growing parish scattered from north to the southern tip of New Zealand. Most are young migrants facing multiple challenges like completing their studies, visa requirements, finding a job, settling down, and there are a lot of students isolated in different parts of New Zealand going through financial, social, and mental stress, and that need a lot of caring and mentoring. The church in New Zealand is still in its infancy. We need to have a consistent approach and care, a clear roadmap of our growth and development. Over the past 15 years, we had several senior leadership changes. We never had a bishop continuously in charge for us for some time. Needless to say, we have lost time and lost opportunities. Let's look into the last slide. Church services in New Zealand were started by the first generation Marthomites and few families from overseas, also include CSI members. We have all arrived from different parts of the world. Not everyone can read and write Malayalam. The second generation born and brought up here have no reading, writing skills in Malayalam. And many of the parents themselves know very little Malayalam. They are not aware of the process being followed in Kerala or at the Sabha level either. Given this situation, our worship service, especially in Malayalam, does not make much sense to them as they cannot understand what is being said. Consequently, they are leaning towards local churches or groups. This has led to a major decline in attendance and will impact the church, impact the future of the church itself. Currently, we are planning to invest in a church building. We don't have a church building of our own now, which will take at least another 25 to 30 years to repay that bank loan. If we are not able to maintain attendance, who and how we will sustain this project? We do not know how this will impact the future of our church here. Preaching and pastoral ministry should be reimagined in the diaspora community. This is a very serious concern to us. Sermon is the most important part of our service, and our young people should be able to take away the message and apply it in their day-to-day life. Many a times we overlook the heartbeats and challenges of these young children. We should be open to negotiating what we consider non-negotiable in Kerala. Our church must be open to practices and traditions when it comes to overseas parishes. Liturgical revision and openness are equally required. Our Achan should have sufficient exposure to non-Malayali context and ecumenical settings. They should be open to adopt new ministry settings. Possibly the term should be extended to 4 years. Unless we prayerfully and intentionally reform again, we are risking creating a culture that merely promotes going to church and taking communion as ritual for our salvation. Reformation is not one-time event, but rather an ongoing process. Though at present we do not have a resident vicar, we are so fortunate to have Reverend Very Reverend Case Matthew Achan. He is currently vicar in charge for New Zealand. Achan does all the services and meetings through online for Auckland and as well as 5 other locations. I hope we will continue this discussion involving everyone in Asia Pacific locations, Middle East, and Europe in the next meeting. Our concerns are real. Comparatively, we are very insignificant in number. If our cries are unheard, we will face the same situation as in the Europe or in UK. The magnificent churches there are now only for the tourists or being sold for other purposes. After 2 generations, there may be no Marthamites left on this side of the world to hold our legacy. Thank you for listening. Hope we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. George Burgess, for your presentation and the concerns that you raised. I personally believe that those are very important concerns and to be discussed in the various forums of our church. And you know, the anxieties and the challenges that the church faces in New Zealand should be heard. Thank you, Dr. George Burgess. Now we will move to Dr. Usha George for her presentation. I welcome Dr. Usha George to present her paper. Yeah.
Thank you, Achin. Respected moderator Achin, organizers of this event, all participants, and of course, brothers and sisters in Christ. I'm delighted to be part of this. I'm delighted to be part of this event.
You are mute, Dr. Usha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I start again? All right. Respected moderator Achin, organizers of this event, participants, and of course, speakers who just finished and who will be following me. I'm delighted to be part of this event, part of this discussion forum, and thank you for having me. I'll have a quick updated bio of myself. From 1994 onwards, I've been a faculty member, associate dean, and dean of the Faculty of Social Work and Community Services at University of Toronto and Ryerson University, where I am right now. I served as a dean of a faculty, then vice president of research and innovation at the same university. Right now, I'm leading a center for research on immigration and settlement. My own scholarship and research is in the area of immigration and settlement, mobility and change. And so I'm quite excited to talk about this issue simply because I haven't had research on the Marthoma community, but I've done quite a lot of work in other areas and on other communities. I'm also, for the last 2 years, the vice president of the Canadian Marthoma Church. I've been a member of the church ever since we came to Canada, which is in 1989. Before I go into what I want to say, I just want to have a couple of very general comments. One is that continuity and change is characteristic of all social systems. So nothing stays stable, stagnant, they all change. Whether the change is good or bad, we don't know, but definitely there is change. And religion is no exception. Over the years, religion has undergone major changes. and religion is redefining itself. For example, we know that in the Western countries, especially particularly in North America, we know that there is a wave of secularism that is passing through. And so, as it was said before, there are lots of mainstream churches which are just closed and which are open only on rare occasions for some event or something. Other than that, the number of churchgoers have declined dramatically over the years. Pew Research Center in the US have actually said that the number of nuns, nun meaning, are you religious? Do you have a religion? You don't have a religion. And then there is a nun. In other words, these are people who believe in God, who pray, but they have no membership in organized religions. There are quite a number. The number of those nuns are increasing overall. So there is that secularization trend that's happening throughout Europe and North America. So we need to understand that. So I'll go quickly to the Canadian context. Canadian immigration is very unique in the sense that it varies or changes dramatically different from the US situation that we are all familiar with. Immigration over the past 30 or 100 years has been an enduring feature of Canadian society. Canadians are very particular about who they bring into the country. Right now, the economic class, which is the group of people that the government selects mainly to fill the requirements in the labor market, is the majority that is coming into this country. Family reunification, that is bringing in parents and grandparents, is minimal. And then, of course, there's a refugee class, but the biggest category is economic class, because Canada constantly needs more skilled workers, and it's important for them to have this. And so they select immigrants on the basis of a point system that awards points for highly skilled young individuals. Now, so we all know what's diaspora, and the first generation of immigrants who came into this country from Kerala. We know, and when we talk about a second generation, I also include what is called the 1.5 generation. These are the young people who came with their parents. They were not born in Canada, but they came and did most of their schooling in Canada. So I combine the 1.5 and second generation and call them second generation, as opposed to the first generation of immigrants who came into this country. Just like the US at that point, So I also want to kind of give, after the immigration notion, I also want to give Canada's understanding of immigrants' place in the country. Once again, I'm comparing and contrasting with the US, which kind of thinks, I used to think, and I can't do that anymore, that all immigrants assimilate into the melting pot that is the US. Canada has a very different theoretical framework on the whole. They call it integration, where the immigrant adopts the systems of the host country, which is Canada, and also change accordingly. At the same time, the immigrant is allowed to continue with the practices and beliefs and systems that they came with. So it's a mixed system, whereas there is a give and take, and integration is the term that we use. Now, of course, there are critiques of this integration notion, because we all say that, well, of course, the expectation on the part of the immigrant to get integrated into the system is higher than the system changing to accommodate the immigrants. So discrimination at work and inability to get work in your profession, these are all systemic issues that have no solution so far, but we have been talking about it quite some time. So then there are new terms that have come into existence. So don't think of integration as a holistic process that is going to happen, but let us think of segmented integration. In other words, I like the mainstream jobs, so I get into that. I'm not saying that just because I'm a Marthoma and a Malayali, I will not do certain jobs. You get integrated into the labor market. You get integrated partially, at least, into the society and cultural traditions of Canada. At the same time, you maintain some of the basic essence that you came up with. So there are notions around a segmented integration, transnationalism, that is being part of different countries. These are all predominant processes that are happening, and Canada acknowledges the importance of this. So much of this is actually gathered or condensed in the term that we use always, multiculturalism, which allows individuals to keep their identity, to be proud of their families, to be rooted in their ethnic identity, at the same time, leave space for Canadian customs and values to be inculcated into your own makeup, your own living. So certain practices that are so critical to some other communities are not accepted in Canada, and therefore there are legal limits on what can be done, and there are punishments attached to, or legal repercussions attached to these things. So multiculturalism encourages people to maintain their identity, but at the same time, see what can be absorbed from the Canadian society, because the Canadian values of freedom and dignity and individual rights and all of that is extremely important. Now, I'm saying all of this because for the Mar Thoma community that has come here in the first generation, the first generation were mainly healthcare workers and their partners who came into this country, established themselves. And of course, the first thing that every immigrant group does is to establish a church in Canada, a church when they, or a religious place when they come to Canada. The first Mar Thoma service was actually in Canada, was celebrated in 1972 by Reverend Abraham Lincoln at Trinity College Chapel at the University of Toronto. We were approved as a congregation in 1978 and as a parish in 1981. The Canadian Mar Thoma Church Toronto was the first Mar Thoma parish in Canada. In 1987, we moved to our own church at 313 Main Street, Markham. And we also hosted 3 North American family conferences, 1983, 1997, and 2007. I will skip the rest of our story, but this month in November, we'll be celebrating our 44th Parish Day, which is the 44th, basically the 44th anniversary of our coming together as a church. And as I mentioned, it is Canadian Mar Thoma Church is the first church that was established parish that was established in Canada, and the largest even now. We have a second parish, it's the St. Mark's Church in Milton, but this is still the largest one. Now, in talking about the challenges and opportunities, I want to kind of divide them up. Now, I would talk about the opportunities, and then I also talk about the challenges. Of course, the first generation immigrants were happy to have these churches established. They struggled economically to have these churches established. But they were delighted about the fact that they could come together as a group. They met because this group met their social needs and provided them with a sense of belonging, built social capital, and many of them over time became economically very successful. And they brought up their children in the Canadian context, of course, within the boundaries of the Mar Thoma Church. I would argue that there are two different contradictory processes that are happening within the Mar Thoma Church in Canada, and for that matter, everywhere else, I would say. First is the maintenance of the status quo as demonstrated by the first generation of Canadian Mar Thomites who came here. Now, the opportunity here is that not only is the status quo maintained in terms of the liturgy, the communal and corporate worship, and etc. The church community provides a forum for all senior or established immigrants to come together in a social gathering as well. So it is not only spiritual, but also social at this time. And as of now, the church, of course, as we all know, is has got a number of sub-organizations. All of the sub-organizations function as stipulated from the center. That's what's happening. Now, the opportunity
Dr.
there
Usha, can you conclude in 2 minutes?
Oh, I haven't even started. Okay,
Yeah.
so the opportunity that we have is that the church is growing. Sorry, I need 5 minutes. Let me just finish off this one. So the church is growing. We started with 85 families in the early 1980s, but right now we have about 299 families. So it is still growing. Why? Immigration is a feature in Canada. They are still bringing people. They'll continue to bring people. So the church membership will increase. Marthoma Church will function just the way it used to function in the past everywhere else, particularly even in Kerala. So we are a carbon copy of what's happening in Kerala, I would say. The other contradiction, the other side is a challenge, which is the second generation. The second generation is definitely going into a spiritual realm which has been unexplored in the traditional Marthoma context, because there is a big exodus of the second generation to non-denominational evangelical churches. They feel that the Marthoma Church is too constricted. They are not appealing to seeking spiritual growth, and personal and psychological satisfaction is an essential feature of religious worship. And therefore, they go into these non-denominational churches, and they feel that the Marthoma Church is kind of stagnant, and so anti-intellectual, anti-institutional, and anti-corporate is the characteristic of this first generation. In fact, I had the opportunity to talk to a number of young people, second generation people who are still staying in the church and who have moved away from the church. For all of them, their ethnic identity of being Marthoma is very different from being a Christian. So they say that, okay, you can be Marthoma, but that is not your Christianity. Your Christianity should be based in Christ. And Christ is the savior, and Christ should provide, you have to have a personal relationship with God and to go to grow spiritually. So they embrace what is called an individualistic model of Christianity, which they say that is not available in the Marthoma Church because of the repetitive nature of our liturgy and all of those things. I'll quickly kind of talk about some of the very points that they raised as the challenges. One, as I mentioned, the resistance to change, and therefore non-responsiveness to the articulated needs of the second generation. As I said, repetitive services, length of service, even the content of sermons, all of that is a problem for them because they are looking for psychological and individual satisfaction from religion to become more loving, more caring, and less stressed out, which is not what they are getting. The church is non-inclusive, simply because there are no official positions that are given to second generation people, just second generation individuals. So non-regular second generation feel that they are less inclusive. There's very little outreach to people who do not come to church. We know that they exist there, but very little outreach to those. Communication issues has been identified. There is a huge generational and cultural divide. As I said, most of them feel that the Achins who are coming to Canada for 3 years do not have an understanding of the local culture and challenges faced by the second generation. And they also feel that they are not being understood. As a result, the next issue is the alienation they feel, a sense of they don't feel they belong. They feel like strangers, isolated, and not in a fellowship in the church, even when they attempt to come there. And some of them are very critical about our lack of understanding of current social issues. For example, in Canada, not so much in the US, the whole issue around indigenous communities and the harm that was done to the indigenous communities by Christians is a topic of big discussion. And I'm actually a member of the Canadian Council of Churches. Their whole project for 3 years is how to reconcile. We haven't even heard of that in our churches, for example. So that lack of understanding of social issues as they occur, and no particular stance on major social changes that are happening is a problem. At the same time, there are some who like the social context of our church, but there are some who feel that it is very isolating. And my final point is that you could ask me the question, but there are still some second generation people who go to these churches. And the answer that I got from somebody who is a very ardent second generation churchgoer is that that's because my father, my parents were more Malayalis and Marthamites than you could ever imagine. In other words, it is the pressure that they got from the church, from their parents, and then moved that into, but they also go to other churches. That doesn't mean that they're exclusively Marthamites. So the solutions are well known. We need to be responsive to the requirements of this second generation. The problems are there, but what exactly how do we address is the biggest challenge that the church has to face. And I'll stop there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Usha, for that meaningful presentation. I think she has brought two important issues. Firstly, she presented the background of the Canadian context. And then I think there are two important issues. One is the contradiction between the transplanted church and a transforming church. And secondly, the contradiction between the parents' church and the children's church. So let us move to Dr. Reggie Matthew. Dr. Reggie Matthew, it's your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Achin. I believe you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Achin. Yes, I'm coming to you from Sydney in Australia. I thank you for this opportunity to speak at this forum, and welcome to everybody. As Dr. Usha George mentioned, I'm actually generation 1.5. ഞാൻ 4ാം ക്ലാസ് വരെ ഞാൻ നാട്ടിൽ പഠിച്ചു. അത് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് മുഴുവൻ ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ ഓസ്ട്രേലിയയിലാണ്. പക്ഷെ എനിക്ക് മലയാളത്തിൽ എനിക്ക് പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള അറിവില്ല. So I will speak only in English when it comes to my presentation. So my main qualification really is that I've been a Sunday school teacher for 20 years. And have been involved in VBS, taking part in VBS in a number of cities across Australia. So I just want to share some of my experiences and insights focused on our young generation, focused on our youth. So first, let me just share my screen. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right, that's great. So as a title for my talk, I titled it Challenges in Contextual Communication of the Gospel. So the gospel message actually remains the same, but how we communicate it has to be contextualized, and that brings about certain challenges. So I want to look at these challenges in contextual communication of the gospel, focusing on the youth of our diaspora community, sharing my experiences, observations, and suggestions from Sydney. So here's a quick outline. I want to, first of all, give some observations of the Sydney parish and use Sydney as an exemplar for the rest of Australia, if I can. Then I want to look at the local context that our young people are living in. And I want to understand that local context. And then given that local context, we ask ourselves, what are the challenges and what are some solutions? So I'll follow this format. First, observations from Sydney, then understanding the local context, and then the subsequent challenges and solutions. So when we look at the Sydney parish, this is the Bethel Marthoma Church in Sydney. We are celebrating 25 years of ministry in the city of Sydney. In Sunday school, for which I was a headmaster for 20 years, currently we have about 170 children. Our youth group has about 70 members. So we can see there is a big gap between our Sunday school and our youth group members. there's a noticeable number of youth missing. I can say that after the age of 18, some of our youth leave our Matama church to regularly attend another church. Some youth have irregular contact with our Matama church and attend no other church at all. Some stop going to church totally, while a number remain within the church. So this is the observations of Sydney, and it might be similar in other diaspora communities. So the question arises, what shall we do? And I'm suggesting that first we understand the context of our youngsters to respond appropriately. Let's look at some biblical examples of communicating in context. Jesus used farming imagery, farming examples in his parables when speaking to an agrarian society. So Jesus used images and ideas and concepts that an agrarian society was familiar with. That is communication in context. Paul in Athens went to the temple of the unknown God and then used that figure to talk to the Greeks. Let me tell you about the God for whom you have a temple, the temple of the unknown God. So that is Paul communicating in context. So communicating in context is biblical, and that's what we are called to do. So how do we do that for our youngsters? That's what I want to explore. So let's look at the local context. We have a young boy here, let's say 15 years old. He's connecting with the Matama church and involved with his family. But what are the other major influences? First of all, there is the community, the general community, or friends, we can say. He's engaged in the education system or school. He's also aware of other churches or the local Christian scene. And there are influences and questions that arise from these three entities or three local influences. And that then influences the interactions with family and also the Matama church. So I just want to take each section one by one, look at the context, the questions that arise, and challenges that arise, and possible solutions. So first, let's look at community. In the Sydney context and the Australian context, majority of the people have no affiliation with any religion. People of faith, of any faith, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, people of faith are in the minority. So this is a very different setting to an Indian society. In Indian society, everyone has some religious background or has some religious belonging. So the context of this young boy growing up in Australia is radically different to the context in India, where the majority of the people here have no religion at all. So then the question arises for this young boy, why believe in anything at all? Why be a person of faith? Majority of the people seem to live without going to church or temple or ashram. So why believe in anything and why have a faith at all? So these are the questions that arise in a young person's mind. Possible solution I'm saying here is for the laity to frame the questions, for the laity to frame these fundamental questions, and the laity to take leadership to facilitate discussions of fundamental questions of faith. I note that the youngsters may not be able to articulate these questions well. They have these questions and doubts in their mind, but they may not be mature enough or articulate enough to express these questions with clarity. So that is the role of the laity. We know what our youngsters are experiencing. It's up to us to frame these questions. The clergy who are new to Australia may not identify these questions at all. So this is the role for the laity to frame the questions and then to start and facilitate the discussions. Often and currently, there is a disconnect. There are these fundamental questions in the minds of our youngsters. Why believe in anything? Why be a person of faith? But when that person engages with the Matama church, we are trying to teach him the symbols that are used in worship. It's a total disconnect. There are some fundamental questions being asked and that require fundamental answers. And currently, I believe that is not happening very well. And the laity needs to take leadership there. Next, we go and examine the education system. A young boy going to school in Sydney would be trained in critical thinking. He would be trained in systematic thought and encouraged to question. So perhaps this is a little bit unlike the parents' generation that is more readily accepting. The boy or young person is encouraged to ask questions, encouraged to explore, encouraged to research, and use critical thinking and systematic thought to come up with answers, to explore and to come up with solutions. So, given this context, what happens? The young person will bring his critical thinking tools to church and bring critical thinking to faith and say, I want some answers when I apply critical thinking to what the Bible is saying. The young person will seek a systematic explanation of faith, and families often are ill-equipped to meet these demands. So what happens now? How do we meet the challenges brought about by the education system, encouraging them to question and to think for themselves? And when those tools are brought into the church. So a possible solution here is for clergy to engage with our youth, focusing on apologetics. So our clergy are trained in apologetics, in defending the faith, in systematic theology, but that has to be connected with our youth. So that is something which needs to happen and we need to focus on. Another very important element that I'm suggesting is to initiate Bible study for teenagers, for youth, and for small family groups. So this is a reform that I feel we need church-wide. We need to equip families to grapple with the questions of our youngsters. And the way to do that is through Bible study, regular weekly Bible study. And to start this or to encourage this, we need Bible study guides. Either the church develops Bible study guides or there are plenty of Bible study guides already available. The church can create a list of resources, the church recommends a list of resources that can be used for Bible study on a weekly basis. This will encourage families to also grapple with these questions and to provide answers for our youngsters. Next influence is the local church scene or the other churches. So what are the major local influences? There are local churches that are influential. In Sydney, it is Hillsong. Some of you may have heard of Hillsong, and also the Sydney Anglican Church. So these are the two major influences in Sydney. In other cities, you can identify your own sort of local influences. So this creates certain challenges. Our church, the Matama Church, is understood by youngsters with respect to these other local churches. So questions arise. For example, can we worship like Hillsong? So the Matama worship is seen with respect to Hillsong. So that's the question that comes. Can we worship like Hillsong? Or on the other end of the spectrum, a question might arise, are we overemphasizing worship? So if you belong to the Sydney Anglican group, you might be asking this question. The Matama Church overemphasizes worship. If you belong to the Hillsong cluster, you might be asking, why can't we worship in a more lively style like Hillsong? So the young people are seeing Matama Church with reference to their major local influences. So what are the solutions here? Possible solution is to really explain our worship with respect to local influences. So we are good at explaining our worship in terms of symbols and practices, but that's a detail. But we need to localize it and see it in context and explain why are we worshiping the way we worship. So we need to explain our worship and liturgy with a reference to local influences such as Hillsong and the Sydney Anglican Church. So just as an example, I would say that in Hillsong, a lot of the worship is a performance. And much of the worship are individuals worshiping. While in the Matama Church, the emphasis is on corporate worship. The chanting, the songs are all designed for all to take part together in corporate worship. So that is an explanation that needs to be given to our youngsters, so they can appreciate our worship in the context of what is happening locally. Next, I just want to focus on our church itself, because there are some changes that our church itself can make, some challenges from the Matama Church itself. And the first issue, I would say, is the issue of language, which has already been raised by Mr. George Varghese and Dr. Usha George. So there are services in Malayalam. And the challenges here is that many of our youngsters do not understand Malayalam, and this limits the teaching through sermon and liturgy. So what are some solutions? And I have a number of sort of ideas here, and I'll quickly share them. First of all, we need a complete translation of the Malayalam service. We do have an English service, but it's not a complete translation of Malayalam. So for example, there is a chant, Pushpamanam Opamala, Tenekal Nalla Rasam. There is no translation for that in the English service. So I'm just giving that as an example because that was part of my Sunday school lesson a few weeks ago. And when I asked the children, what is the meaning of this? Nobody could answer me. So because why? Because there is not a complete translation of our Malayalam service. So that is something which we can do quite easily, and which will make a dramatic change. A complete translation of Malayalam service. We also need to make slides available, slides that contain Malayalam, the translation and transliteration, so they can be projected during the service. Actually, it is also a useful way to teach Malayalam. Malayalam, adante artham English Malayalam korchude padikkan ichuru eluppamundu. So it is a way of teaching language also. All three has to be there in the slides that is projected: the Malayalam, the translation, and the transliteration. Currently, in many churches, we have Malayalam and we have transliteration, but not the translation, because also a complete translation is also missing. Furthermore, sermon points need to be made in English and projected onto a slide. So when there is a Malayalam sermon, at least the children can follow the points, the main points that are projected on the screen. I have some other suggestions, and that is to include one English song in the new songs that are released for Mariamman Convention. It is a good way of opening an avenue to many of our talented youngsters who can compose and write songs. So if we have one song in English in the Mariamman Convention, it is also a signal that we send out to many of our youngsters to say, you are valuable in our community. You can also contribute to the convention by writing these songs. Another suggestion is to translate into English some of our most loved Malayalam songs. For example, songs by Sadhu Kochunyu Upadeshi. If you can translate this faithfully in English, it will be a gift to our youngsters and also to the worldwide church. So these are some examples in which how we can overcome the language gap. So I just want to quickly summarize our possible solutions that I've mentioned. First of all, laity to frame questions of why we believe and why we should have faith. These are fundamental questions. Next, clergy to engage with our youngsters, especially with the focus on apologetics. Initiate Bible study, which will help our youngsters grapple with some of the questions. And this is Bible study that's required for all teenagers, youth, and family groups, and have resources that will help this Bible study. We need to explain at a local parish level our worship with respect to local influences, other church influences, so that we can explain our worship and liturgy with reference to example Hillsong and the Sydney Anglican Church. There are a number of suggestions I've made in regards to bridging the language gap, We need a complete translation of the Malayalam service. We need slides with both Malayalam translation and transliteration. And there are songs also that we can incorporate in English to the convention, and translations of our Malayalam hymns to English. Lastly, and I'll finish with this, is for Australia and also for New Zealand, we need a clear path for full-time ministry training for our youngsters. We need some kind of agreement to study at a local theological college in Australia with an additional 6 months or 12 months training in India, which can then follow on to ordination and ministry. Just as information, 3 young men from our Sydney parish have completed studying theology at Moore College, which is the Sydney Anglican College here, Moore College. And they are now serving the Anglican Church in various ministries. So we have a proven track record of dedicated young men opting for ministry. What we lack is a clear path for ministry training for the Australian and New Zealand Marthoma community. So I'll finish with that, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Reggie Matthew, for that presentation. Basically, I believe he concentrated on 2 important issues. One is the contextual communication of the gospel, and the other one is localizing the worship. And he has made many other suggestions. I think all those suggestions are important and valuable. Thank you, Dr. Reggie Matthew. Now, let's listen to Mrs. Suma Chako. Can you, yes, Suma Chako.
Thank you, Achin, for inviting me to this panel. I just want to share my screen quickly. Oops, okay. Okay. All right, let me just. I thank all the presenters before me for setting the stage and putting the diaspora community issues, the general issues to light. So I want to quick breeze through some of the slides. I just kind of put bullet points. I don't want to go into the context because North American context, you know that it's a melting pot. We have plenty of churches. We have stuff going on. We have an established diocese. So, you know, there is not a lot to say about North American context. And also Achin, again, Matthew Achin had been a youth pastor here. And I also see Dr. Reverend K. Abraham, who had been here before. I mean, there are a lot of people who in this venue itself that has very good experience about North American context. So I'm going to quick go into what I just generally I don't want to go into the context. So my topic is basically light to delighten, which is our church motto, is light to delighten. And then how will we keep it lit? That is our challenge at this point because of all the youth that are leaving the churches. And, you know, Marthoma churches all over the world are experiencing a drain, but more so in the US, there has been a continuous and steady exit of youth and young members. Hold on one second. Having some technical challenges, sorry. Okay, so there has been and continues to be a steady exit of youth and young families, many with young children from the Marthoma churches in the US. And I will just go into, this issue has been discussed extensively in multiple forums where clergy, parents, and youth have participated. A lot of discussions have happened, but we do not have a very good, firm answer or no affirmation. So some relevant historical context I want to give you is I am actually a member of Philadelphia Marthoma Church. So this is, our church is one of the oldest and biggest churches in the North American diocese from the beginning. Now it's not biggest anyway. So now there are 5 parishes in our region, in the Philadelphia region. So basically it's been divided. So now we have, it's not the biggest, but again, this is a 3rd generation church. Basically from humble beginnings since our inception in the 70s. We have led many activities in the diocese. We had well-organized Sunday school. We still have organized Sunday school, large English and Malayalam choirs, active youth fellowships, 2 services every Sunday, 1 English, 1 Malayalam. Some very resourceful and hardworking leaders. We are blessed with many good leaders to teach Sunday school or to lead the youth. And also there were early identification. We have, when there were, we wanted to include the youth into many things. So there were mission activities that were actually, for the, they participate, our youth participated in neighborhood ministries as well as Native American mission, conducting VBS, helping build houses for the marginalized with enthusiasm and dedication. Despite of all these activities, majority of them started leaving the church and formed churches where they felt the service, the sermons, and other activities more meaningful and close to their hearts, which the Marthoma Church could not provide. This had been a hot topic over the years during family conferences, organization conferences, and all gatherings. And there is continual conversations. What I'm presenting here is nothing new or my opinions. We have had discussions and reports that were shared with our church leadership at different times. And this really means that there are no easy answers to this challenge that we are facing, really. There is unanimous agreement that the issue exists with youth and young families leaving the Marthoma churches in the US. But the question arises that does the Marthoma Church perceive this an important issue in the US, even though the matter has existed for over 2 decades? And the age range of how the Marthoma Church defines youth makes it difficult to discuss the issue at a broader level. Currently, the members aged 12 years to 35 years of age are part of the Teen to Youth Fellowship. And of course, as you know, the needs of a 12-year-old is very different from what is of a 35-year-old or around that. So Yuvajana Sakyam and Yuvajana Sakyam youth and the young families, considering that the larger Marthoma Church parishes have a sizable active Yuvajana Sakyam member participation, it seems that the Marthoma Church has not actively addressed the focus issue thus far in the US. Also, there's a transplanted church in the US Church, as Sachin mentioned earlier, is a transplanted church. Do we have the interest and the ability to meet the spiritual needs of all its members? And also statistical data shows that immigration from India and the number of youth marrying those with an upbringing in Kerala continues to decline. So these are the things that we need to be focusing on. In the previous generations, as parents established their jobs and homes in the US, living in a location, in driving distance to a Marthoma Church was a strong criterion, but sadly for the youth and the young families, that is no longer a criterion. And also lack of consistent Bible studies and ministries relevant to the lives of its parishioners. Many youth and the young families that leave the Marthoma Church join other churches of non-Malayali origin with a strong emphasis on Bible teaching and existing ministries. I'm not saying that Marthoma Church is not gospel-centered or gospel-focused, it is. But again, is it relevant and relatable as what the young people are thinking? English services are currently not conducted in all Marthoma parishes in the US on all Sundays, thereby a lack of interest amongst those who have limited familiarity with Malayalam or have a comfort level, as Reggie mentioned. Again, that's one of the issues. Even in the parishes where, despite the existence of an English service every Sunday, like ours, the issue exists. This needs to be addressed as well. And other reasons for the existence of this issue, youth are not feeling connected to the people in the church. I'm sure Sam is going to talk a lot about the youth issues, and he is more in tune with the issues of the youth. So anyway, most Indian churches work best for traditional young adults in the sense that those with the life journeys and life questions that are normal and conventional. But most young adults no longer follow a typical path of leaving home, getting an education, finding a job, getting married, and having kids, all within before they reach 30 years of age. So these life events are being delayed reordered, and sometimes pushed completely off the radar among today's young adults. So again, the other thing is the clash of cultures. American culture, younger Americans have been shaped by a culture that esteems open-mindedness, tolerance, and acceptance. So today's youth and young adults also are the most eclectic generation in American history in terms of race, ethnicity, sexuality, religion, technological tools, and sources of authority. So most young adults want to find areas of common ground with each other, sometimes even if that means glossing over real differences. So this is, again, the churches are being exclusive and only for insiders. As you know, it's kind of like a country club, like we talk to our own friends, that's kind of like the Indian churches. Again, absence of discussion about other faiths. How do we teach our children what the other faiths believe, and how do we make them understand what our faith is? Again, generational changes, baby boomers versus Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. As you can see, the collective harmony and collective society was the baby boomers idea, whereas privacy, individual rights are more in tune with the newer generation. So they want to have what they want and how they want it, whereas we would suffer certain things, in the previous generations. And gender roles, again, that's another important issue. Church promoting male dominance and expecting women to be subservient and docile as being biblical. Again, other reasons are inadequacies of how Marthoma Church clergy relate to their parishioners. It's critical that they can associate well with different demographics, the age and the different people in the parishes. Again, the same way they approachable to all. Again, clergy coming from India. This is another thing that also already mentioned, so I'm not going to the details of that. Again, role of the church need to be made clear by the leadership of the church. The primary reason for existence of the church is not for social fellowship or a place simply to provide the ethnic cultural flavor, as it is evidenced in many Marthoma parishes. Again, youth chaplains were instituted here to help the youth when initially there was the issues brought up, so that they could work exclusively with the youth. But the demographic locations and the parishes served as so huge and so big that you cannot expect a person, one youth chaplain, to cover the needs of all these youth and young families who needs continual support. Again, serious lack of role models. When the older youth leave, the younger children lose who had served as role models for them before. Again, and also lack of emphasis on Christian missions and evangelism within the US. Although we are pioneering efforts in the Native American and Mexico missions, again, the parishioners see the need, especially the younger people see the need to be actively involved within local communities and address contemporary issues within the US, including the social issues such as racism, poverty, things like that. And lack of support groups. How do we address the spiritual needs of members undergoing various stressful situations such as marital issues, conflict with teens and adult children, job loss, mental health, finding spouses, divorce, fertility, interracial marriages? These are all real issues. And how do we support all these, the people with these kind of issues? Serious burnout. Those with spiritual fervor and leadership have and continue to provide necessary leadership, but due to burnout, have already left or seriously considering leaving the Marthoma Church. Are we also spiritual growth and dormancy? Are we promoting, or are we probably, it is critical that the members and the leadership work together for reform in this area. I did a quick focus limited survey for the purpose of this panel. I did not want my opinions. So this was a very small sample, but again, around 25, but again, these were, I wanted to get their answers out there, not mine. So these were prior members of our church. Some are elders in other parishes, they're pastors, worship leaders, very active in leading missions and activities in other churches. So most of them, 100% of the survey participants answered that they are currently a member of another church. And then this was a small sample, mind you. And again, 87% stated that the Marthoma Church helped shape their faith. Wow, we did something right. So again, we helped. So again, I asked about what aspects of the church strongly impacted your faith. And they said Sunday school, the youth league leaders, small group fellowships, conferences, youth fellowship, as you would see, the usual things that we are doing. We're able to worship together on Sundays. And what aspects of the church could be improved? And they said the church is more about the Indian community and culture. And we enjoy the Indian culture, but that's not what the church should be based on. And also, there is no need for children to be competitive in the various contests the church promotes. Church should be a safe place and not a place to show you're better than the other. So that was a little surprising, but that's one of the comments. Again, there is no way to establish a relationship with your pastor when he serves only 3 years. Reggie mentioned this already. So, and also the sermons are watered down and have no substance. It doesn't address sins people really struggle with. So the real issues. And also in churches, children are asked to give sermons and no one is vetting the sermon before it is preached. And also there are no programs or counseling for people or families that are struggling. The Achin is responsible for everything, and that's a lot on one person. So again, they said no church is perfect, but the foundation of a church should be gospel-based. And the other question I asked was during Sunday services, what do you consider when looking for a church? The overwhelming response from the participants was about consistent gospel-centered preaching, teaching, and leadership. Being able to communicate with the members who understand the faith and able to relate. Again, they said praise and worship is important, but will not overtake the importance of the word being spoken. People preferred small groups where they could have more opportunities to discuss things with a small, close group. Other than Sunday worship, what do you consider when looking for a church? They said they are looking for a community, as a faith community, not just an ethnic community. Again, Bible studies and fellowship groups for men and women. As we know, Marthoma Church has Bible studies and groups for women separately, but whereas men do not have, or young boys have that opportunity a lot, other than Sunday school or then comes to youth fellowship. So that they said that the church should groom men. Obviously, this is a man who is talking. The church should groom men to be spiritual leaders, and we do a poor job of that. And then again, have more programs for boys and men to learn the gospel, and mentoring programs for boys and young men. Again, they said youth fellowship pastor is so crucial for the children in this era, because the children are faced with so much. They go out of our home and they go to school. They are in this, in the environment where they need to be, assistance with their emotional and, faith needs. So a place to be open to share sin and struggles without judgment. Again, we do a great job of judging everybody. So again, our Indian community. So again, that's one of the things that kids always talk about. So they are asking for a place to be open. Again, they asked for small opportunities, and they wanted a consistent pastor, a people-focused community. And again, they want all ages to be catered to, and mission opportunities. Mission is big on all their responses, especially local missions. We know that we do a lot of missions to other countries, but local missions were a big part of what they wanted to say. So what were the reasons that you were...
Can you conclude in 2-3 minutes?
Yes, I'll try, Achin. Okay, I'll go forward. Okay, so... Okay, so it is important to acknowledge there are issues, and it is not a solution. There is not one solution to fit all the parishes. So therefore, within the ecclesiastical limits, adopt changes specific to the Marthoma parishes in the US, and also we recommend you to kind of create a commission to study the focus issue. And when someone leaves the church, there should be a serious evaluation at the local and the central level. Utilize lessons learned for corrective action if needed. Okay, so again, another thing that as Reggie or somebody, one of the panelists mentioned before, the duration of the Sunday English service could be shortened, allowing for praise and worship songs. This we have done to an extent. Again, allow members to lead discussions in their faith journey so that others can benefit. And I'm going to go forward to, okay. So efforts at different levels from the pioneer leaders and current leaders have done a lot. Few changes and initiatives such as English-only congregations, English praise and worship services have happened. And this is a work in progress. And this is a subject that need to be pursued with all concerned parties at a larger scale. We may want to do a formal survey, more organized leadership structure at the parish level, children and youth involvement in all church activities. Give them roots, you give them wings. That's what the saying says. So, they know, give them wings so they can fly, but at the same time, know who they are. And again, this issue is not unique to Marthoma Church. All ethnic churches are facing similar issues, though there may be degree variations. And it is highly unlikely that those who have left the Marthoma Church will return, but consider the positive changes that have aided other groups and try to incorporate them. Again, as a church, it is precisely our youth and the young families have to carry the torch of light to enlighten, and therefore it will be really helpful. It will benefit us as a church to affect change so that our Marthoma Church can grow in Christ in every way. So thank you for this opportunity. It was quick.
Thank you, Mrs. Suma, for that presentation. You have brought out a number of issues, and as a person who worked in US with the youth, and I can very well understand what you have already mentioned. And I just want to make it into two important things. One is the ethnic community versus a faith community, and the other one, a worship community versus a missional community. I think those are the issues you brought out. Thank you so much for that. And I invite Dr. Sam George for the final presentation.
Thank you, we are Matthew Atchen, my fellow panelists. Thank you for Marthoma Darshana Vedi to take up this theme. And really, I just want to say amen to all that Suma, Reggie, and Usha and George has said. It's really been, close to my heart, this topic. And I was the first youth worker of the North American Diocese. I've lived in Singapore and Hong Kong. I grew up outside India. I had kind of a front row seat to the generational conversation in the North American context for 30 years or so, but also in Asia and Europe. And what I want to do is just provide, I teach diaspora and migration. I'm a professor here at Wheaton College, and I teach at 5 different schools in Asia and Africa and Europe. So migration is, my life is marked by migration, wandering all through life and just studying scripture. And so I'm a missiologist, a theologian, and I want to kind of share some of the research work that is currently going on. But I see many, many beloved Atchens that I have known for the years, and really grateful that, Darshana Vedi would take the diaspora issue seriously. And the champions like V. Matthew Atchen, and I see Joseph Chaku Atchen here, K. Abraham Atchen, they were all great champions for our communities. For our brief time today, just want to give you an overview and introduce a few things. Hopefully that will spur more conversations as we go, as we deliberate on this theme. We are currently engaged in research. This last October marked 54 years since the first Indian church was established in America. It was in New York. And we have taken up this study called SICNA Research, Study of Indian Christians in North America. It is a survey and documentation of Indian churches and its development, both in the United States and across and Canada. It's a project led by Federation, which is an overseeing all the immigrant churches and immigrant Christians in North America. And myself and a dozen of other scholars and researchers spread all over US and Canada is involved in this research. I want to present some preliminary findings And also we are doing this interview with pioneers, whom we call as those who came to America before 1975. Many have been falling in these years. And so we wanted to do kind of interview them, how the churches came about. This is not just a Mahatma, it is all Indian denomination, all languages, all denomination, Catholic, Protestant, Evangelical, Pentecostal, Brethren, Tamil, Telugu, Punjabi, Gujarati. We are mapping out the entire community. And we also want to draw from the demographical census data from 2020. And so I'll share a few things from the research that may be of importance for this conversation. Indian Americans are 5.1 million strong now. We are talking about post-1965 immigrant diaspora community. Decade to decade, we have been more or less doubling, and we are the most educated and the wealthiest. We are having the political rise and economic disproportionate influence in the American society. That is, by the way, the new Statue of Liberty. We have a vice president who's Indian American. I met Senator Kamala Harris a few months ago before she became a vice president. Understanding diaspora consciousness is important. Understanding what does it mean to be alienated, and both Bible and theology and history of Christianity and American story, American Christianity has much to inform us in this regard, and our connection to ancestral homelands and our roots and struggles to adapt and be relevant in a foreign country. Immigration is often studied in waves, or we talk about waves of immigration. And what does it mean? Who are the major waves? So we have tracking 50s all through 2000s and the last 20 years. Post 2020, 2010 has been the IT worker wave, but we've been largely shaped by the doctor nurses wave, the medical wave, and educators wave. They were the pioneers of our community here in North America. When we look at 2020 census, is just probably the most expansive, detailed research that the US government has ever done. We are just beginning to dig into it. It's just fascinating to see amount of data. So Indians' presence can be significantly seen in many, many states in the US right now. And so we're looking at Indian American Christianity. What are we saying? We're talking about 20% are Christians now. That means around 1 million people in America are Christians. Indians are Christians. So that data, more than half are Hindus. 13% are Christians, 6% Catholic. We are spread over 1,500 churches. All the affiliations, languages, styles, and flavors can be seen in the Indian community. There's an Indian church in every state, all 50 states of the US. Some of them most of them maintain link with ancestral homeland or other denomination, especially local. The waves that shaped Indian American Christianity, of course, we talk about nurses and the medical wave, and that is 1968 and onwards. Higher education wave of the 80s. That's my wave when I came to America to work in the tech industry and do graduate studies, and then felt called to ministry and transitioned to seminary. But yeah, so these are the waves that we're looking at. So who are the churches? Indian American diaspora churches, when you look at, for example, Syrian Orthodox Church, that's the oldest church, Indian denominational church. They have 2 dioceses, some 100 plus churches. Mahatma churches, there are 70 churches. So I'm taking a much more a macro perspective so that we understand we are not in a silo. There is much common learning that we can do from other churches. And I had the good privilege to work across denominations and across language groups across US. So I'm kind of drawing from that. And then our team of scholars have identified, we have team from Catholic, Orthodox, Pentecostals, Evangelicals, Tamil, Telugu, and Bengali gentlemen, who is all part of it. Mizo churches, there are 34 Mizo churches. Sometimes we think it's all Malayali churches. Naga churches, Goan churches, Brethren, ICOG, IPC church, CSI church. We are trying to mapping out all of that. Also other European denominations like Lutheran, Methodist, American Assemblies of God, Church of God, Baptist, Evangelical, Presbyterian Church, Missionary Alliance Church, E-Free Church, or we are tracking all of that. So we're looking at some of the earliest churches, what happened, and trying to tell the story. We are notorious for not recording our own history. We want to capture the story of our communities. So Mahatma's story, history is being written. We have Orthodox Church, Indian Christian Assembly, one of the Pentecostal churches in Queens in 1968. We are telling the story of each of the denomination and probably will come out as a series of books that may be very instructive for all of us. So the first Tamil church, first Telugu church, first Catholic church, the bishop of the Catholic Church is helping us record the story of the Syro-Malabar formation of the diocese. And now they have 2 bishops stationed here in Chicago. Indian Church in Chicago, then we are looking at city by city. We have a lot more data. I'm based in Chicago. New York is very big, but Chicago, we are looking at 150 Indian churches, and oldest being ICF, which is now called ICEFC. So we are looking at each of the denominations. Syro-Malabar Cathedral is 1,800 families. These are like the mega church of the Indian community. And so we are telling a story of a Syro-Malabar Indian mega church in Chicago. Similarly, other denominations. I'll skip over that. I mean, we all know the data of the diocese, Marthoma Diocese in North America, US and Europe, what is happening, and retired clergy to resident bishop, and we are all familiar with that numbers. What shaped us? We are a women-led migration, women-led immigrant church, and that has unique dynamics. Sociologists have studied it and have much more information about it. We are also cyclical in leadership. That means there is no longitudinal learning. Every 3 years, we continue to make the same mistakes. It is clergy-centered, it is episcopal in nature, and we will always remain an immigrant church. Difference between immigrant and diaspora churches is diaspora churches become multi-generational, multi-ethnic, and multinational and local and global at the same time. Whereas immigrant churches are only 1 generation deep. And so we remains as an immigrant church. Much of our voice is immigrant church as long as immigration continues. Second, third generation, and we have talked about it already much. And I want to but some of the things that are really concerned is out marriages and non-marriages. These trends will fundamentally trip our immigrant sentiments and immigrant Christian, church orientation and church culture. Struggle with guilt and shame. They struggle with shame as well as guilt. Understanding that, loss of language, many have talked about it. Coconut Generation book, this was the first major study, not because I wrote it. We had 200 leaders from all across US and Canada come together for a research project, and it's continued to be used widely, and some of you have read this. So we are going through the cycles. These conversations are nothing new. At least for the last 20, 25 years, I've been in part of some 200 conversations like this. And so, but there's much to be cross-pollinated. We are in a silo of the Marthoma Church only. Orthodox Church and the evangelicals and the Pentecostals and brethren are having the same problem. So it is a migration that shapes immigrant churches. It is not the denomination or the polity or our culture or our training. We need to understand migration is fundamentally disruptive, and it reshapes and transforms church and Christianity. Flight of the next generation, we wanted to closely monitor this. We are currently looking at 80% of Indian American born are leaving the church. 20% stay back for reasons like marriage, if they marry from India, or other reasons they are marrying off their parents, they are staying back. We are doing a survey of those who are leaving and why they are leaving. Graying of the Marthoma Church. This is what I call as a graying of the Marthoma Church. So the average age of the church participants on a Sunday morning in any of the Marthoma Church is steadily rising. And it is 50 something now. And so we probably will cross 60, 65 by end of, in the coming few years with no young people coming. 20 and 30s. By age segmentation, we are analyzing different churches. So people in their 20s and 30s are not in the church. And so that is significantly will shape what happens to the church. So where are the second generation going? We wanted to ask this question. So we found some 30% of them are going to American churches. Some of them go to pan-Indian churches. There's no more Malayali because they lost the language. So did the Tamil and the Telugus. All of them are lost the language. They are creating this pan-Indian churches or even pan-Asian churches. They're joining Chinese and Koreans and others. So what we call as a multi-Asian, multi-ethnic churches. White evangelical churches, they are recruiting more and more of Indian American young people into their churches. They're serving in college, parachurch organization, and mission organization. And by virtue of intermarriages, we have a very high educated professional populace, and they're intermarrying. If you marry outside the Indian community, they're less likely to come into an Indian church, leave alone a Marthoma Church. About 50% of Indian Americans don't go to any other church. That's a greater concern for me. More than half of our young people who have grown up in our Sunday school and church don't want God or church. They're so burnt and disillusioned with the Christian experience. And so what can we do? How can we think mission? How can we reach this generation? How can we, the post-secularized and religious nun kind of culture of Western and American culture? Retention strategy. Several bishops we've been talking about the retention. How do we retain young people? So we talked about youth chaplaincy, we talked about American clergy, but none of them seems to be working. to stem the tide. We had two models in Redeemer Church in New Jersey and Crossway in Dallas, and a little bit in Horeb in LA. And all of them at their different levels of retention and able to it. But we lost leaders in big cities like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Dallas. So these are very influential cities, a large number, large percentage of our community. So having lost leaders here will hurt our future of our community and nurturing leadership within our community. So second generation led churches. This is a new trend. There are some 50 second generation led churches across the US. Most of them are in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, Boston, and Orlando. These are affiliated to American denomination. They have grown up in the Marthoma Church and CSI Church, but they're taken ordination with other churches. Like the Baptists, Southern Baptists have recruited many young people from our churches. Assemblies of God, E-Free Church, Alliance, Covenant, Full Gospel, Presbyterian Church of America have recruited many young people from our churches. InterVarsity has some 35 Indian Americans now on their staff. So is Crusade and Navigators, International Justice Mission. The senior most leadership is all Indians now. World Vision, Bible Society are recruiting increasingly young people because they find very committed, spiritually mature, and very committed to ministry and a great sense of theological training and performing very well in ministry training environment. And they're being recruited by other churches. They're also going to missions. Many of them are going to Africa and Europe and Latin America and also going back to India. But they're joining with an American mission organization to serve in India and not necessarily with our own church. So the future of the Marthoma Church, this is a concern that I've heard uncles and aunties and Achins and Bishop ask about it. My statement is, as long as a migration continues, Marthoma Church will continue Marthoma Church as long as Marthomites are coming. But Marthoma wave have reduced. The nursing doctor wave is reduced. IT wave has not been as prominent in the Central Travancore as compared to Bangalore and Hyderabad. So in the last 20 years, we are seeing more Telugu churches come up now than Malayali churches. 70s and 80s was a generation for Malayali churches. Now Telugu churches are popping up all over the country. And so the same thing that happened in the 80s. So we remain a first generation church. There will be a remnant, 10%, 20% who will remain with the Marthoma Church, who will play a marginal role. There won't be any significant role that they will have. They will be overridden by young immigrants who are coming from Kerala, who are well-tuned with language and well-tuned with the culture and the polity in Tiruvalla. We have a ghetto mentality. We don't interact and learn from other churches. Other immigrant churches are making the same mistake. And those who have gone before us, for example, Koreans and Chinese. I just completed a research on 100 years of Chinese in Chicago. I'm not a Chinese, but I just wanted to see what happens over 100 years for an immigrant community, because I'm a diaspora scholar, a migration scholar. It is fascinating. We are no different. As much as we think, Koreans and Chinese are also there, came to America a few decades before us. And we have much to learn from other Asian immigrant communities. What happens in third and fourth generation exactly repeats 10 years or 15 years in the Indian community. So that's why we need to understand American Christianity. What is American Christianity? Christianity is not native to America. It was brought here by immigrants. Brought here by immigrants from different parts of the world every decade and every other century. And so how these immigrant waves of Christianities in plural interact with each other, regenerate Christianity and creates new dynamism for Christianity in America, and it re-engages because of the new connection that it has with other parts of the world. That's why the sociologist here in Chicago who says immigrants are not de-Christianizing America, but they're de-Europeanizing American Christianity. Or I would say is globalizing American Christianity. Now the Asian way, there are some 6,000 Korean American churches in the US, and the Chinese wave, and the Latin wave, and the African wave. Together, they are creating American Christianity. And so we have a stream of Indian American being blended into it. More and more of 80% of young people are blending into the American Christianity. And that will be how American Christianity is. Because who's the American Christian leaders today? Third, fourth generation from Scotland and Sweden and Germany and France and England. Indians will also serve the third, fourth generation, will be part of the American Christian leadership, and they will re-engage with India in new ways. So it's a new way to look at Christianity itself. Christianity is not ethnic-centric or language-centric. It is always evolving and transforming because of the diaspora factor. Because all through the history of Christianity, we see migration has reshaped Christianity. And here we see as America as an immigrant nation, Australia as an immigrant nation, Singapore as an immigrant nation will continue to be redesigned and retransformed as a result of migrant waves. And 1 million Indian Christians have significantly contributed for the future of American Christianity, and we will have a unique role in that. So what am I saying? The growing Indian community in America, 1,500 churches is remarkable for any recent immigrant communities, with the exception of probably Koreans, because 80% of Koreans are Christians, as compared to 20% of Indian Americans. But we have a disproportionate, back in India is 2 or 3%. We have a large percent because a lot of them are converting. Hindus are converting. Many Hindu Gujaratis and Punjabis and Sikhs and Telugus and Tamils are converting. But we have no place in the Marthoma Church because we remain a central Travancore Malayalam-centric church. We have no place to engage a larger community, 80% of Indian Americans. So conflict and generational transition is happening big time. Understand the life cycle of an immigrant church. What happens over stages is important to understand what God does through immigrant communities. Using the diaspora lens is very, very instructive in understanding this. Some of my books there, I'm just very glad that my new book just came out, which compares Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, and other Asian communities. And what does it mean to understand what God is doing in diaspora communities with Asians, and not just in North America, but all over the world. It just came out. The volume 2 is coming out in April, and we have a volume 3 coming out by next summer. Hopefully you will find instruction and find the Marthoma story in the story of other immigrant communities, understand how God reframes and shapes Christianity through mission and through immigration, and what God is doing through the Marthoma community in 2020. And maybe the Sikna research, hopefully we'll document and have some literature on that, looking at the 55 years of the Indian immigrant church and the story of the 1 million Christians in America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sam, for that passionate presentation about the migrant churches, including our church, the Marthoma Church. And one of the, the heartbreaking the fact that Sam has brought is the 50% of our youngsters do not want to go to a church. That is something heartbreaking, and we all have to think about it. Anyway, thank you, Sam, for that presentation. And I was in New York from 2012 to 15, and I still remember the love and affection that I experienced from the second and third generation of our youngsters in New York. And those memories are coming to me when I hear those words of Sam and Suma and other people, but we are facing a lot of challenges, and how do we solve it? I do not know whether there is a solution, but still, I hope our church is a beautiful church with all its foundations, but I personally think that there needs to be a transformation to our church, especially in the diaspora context. So let's have a few minutes for our discussion. We have almost, nearing to 2 hours of presentations, and I do not know how many minutes we can stay in this panel. Anyway, we will take 15 to 20 minutes for discussion, and you can raise your hands and you will be called. And if your question is to a particular presenter, please mention that, and I'll give a chance to them to answer. Otherwise, if you want to raise a question or to comment, you're welcome to do that. I see the hand of J. Manalu. Do you want to speak? No? All right. I see Glenn Thomas. Can you unmute and speak?
Yes, Etchen. Hello. And just want to take this time just to thank all the presenters. Very interesting facts. However, I just have a question. We're all talking about the same thing for years and years and years. I did not see anything new. I just want to know what the solution is. What is the solution for whatever was discussed here and brought? I mean, each one of you said things. Sam's stats were the only ones that obviously, were, it's more newer, but everybody else presented very similar stats. The youth here, second gen, they don't believe that, they are part of the larger church. There's a reason for it. The main reason is that the first gen are not willing to step back. That's a big issue. So it forces them to leave the church, right? Now we have 2 second gen churches, which a lot of you, I don't know if you're aware of it. One's in Dallas called Crossway, and the other one is Redeemer in Jersey. So there are initiatives by the second gen. What they're doing is they're taking the initiative, which our church should have, and which we did not. So that's a failure on the first gen's part, that they're not allowing second gen or third gen to participate in the life of the church. So now they're leaving. So I guess, apart from making these comments based on what I heard, I guess the real question is, like, when do we take ownership, or like, how long do we wait for things to change? I mean, anybody can answer that.
I think Dr. Sam can respond. Please unmute.
Achan, I think, what, Glenn said is, Glenn, myself, several of us have sat through conversation with churches and, Achans and bishops decade after decade. But I think overall commitment from Tiruvalla, many Achans have raised this issue. It is not just the laity or the second generation. Achans who have served here for 2-3 years, all the youth chaplains who have seen the, kind of the heartbreak and the loss and the pain and the anguish of the second generation have raised this issue repeatedly. But there is somehow something is somewhere it's just stuck. And that willingness, Felix Ceremony will say yes, Theodosius Ceremony will say yes. But I don't know. Is it our polity? Is it our structure? Is it our resistance? Is it the first generation's, a lack of confidence or insecurity that they're holding on to position and power, or they don't see another model? So I don't know where. I think there need to be, substantial soul searching at this, diocesan council, Sabha council. How do we do? How do we minister to the next generation? Not how Kottayam Seminary is training. We need to look at the challenges of the needs of the next generation. And it's not just Marthama community. We need to look at broadly. How can we engage the entire Indian American community? Because second generation church will not be Central Travancore Malayali only. It will get diversified. It will become multi-ethnic and multinational. And what does it mean to have non-Indian and even non-Malayalis, non-Marthamites as a part of the second generation church? Because that's what is happening in Redeemer and Presbyterian. They will open up because they go to school with them, they work with them, they're getting married to many of them. They also want to do church with them. They don't want to be an ethnic exclusive Central Travancore, recreate the culture and draw the, the comfort from, nostalgia of being transported on a Sunday morning for 2 hours back to, Pathanamthitta and Koranjeri. That is the need for the first generation. That is not the need for the second generation, because this reference point has shifted. So
and just
we need
adding
to
on to,
yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
I'll leave others.
I think Usha has something to say.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say that on a very concrete level, it is up to Tiruvalla and of course North American diocese and including New Zealand and so on, to identify 2 or 3 urgent issues that the second generation wants to address, and then address them. Of course, we can't create social change overnight. We can change the entire system. System changes slowly, and therefore identify the most important, most pressing need of the times as expressed by the second generation. At a very concrete level, we can do that.
All right. We have Ashwin.
The blessing
Thakur.
of all these 3 minutes
Ashwin,
for sure.
Can you unmute and speak?
Thank you, Matthew Atchin, for the opportunity. I want to especially thank all the presenters who've presented their points today. I reside in the UK. I've been here for now. I mean, I presume the US is much more advanced, but I believe the UK will face the same situation that the US has faced probably, because if we look from a migration point of view, those who traveled in the 1970s, their children don't attend the church today, yet they're the ones who still sit in power in our churches today. The younger ones are not literally listened to. Second challenge I think that the church has is like already there was. It's already Reggie Uncle mentioned that in relation to apologetic studies and a lot of the youths that leave the church, they ask critical questions on faith-related topics, and there is literally no answers, because our parents' generation never questioned; they just believed what was told. And like Reggie Uncle mentioned, with education, like critical thinking, and where you're supposed to question. And I know members from a sister parish in here, St. John's, Hounslow, where the youths have left the church purely because they just said Marthoma Church is watering down on their teachings. They're not focusing on the Bible. It's more today, even in my eyes, today the church is becoming more of a social gathering where people come in to just socialize. Communion is just a mode of socialization, because you spend 1.5 hours in church, the rest 3 hours people still spend in church, but it's just talking to each other. There is no lack of initiative for scriptural learning. I won't blame the Atchins. I cannot blame the Atchins. Atchins have too much. Unfortunately, our churches are a family or community churches, so you have a multi-generational aspect to cater to. So I will never blame the Atchins. But I think one solution is probably where the church, inside local churches, so there's like a group of people that are being trained within church teachings and biblical teachings, so that they then can impart the situation or the knowledge to the children. Because we are still following the old practice of looking up to the Atchin to give an answer for anything that we face today. And I think that model has to completely change. Then only people can stay within the churches. I don't know, one of the aunties mentioned about youth fellowship being the ages from 12 to 35. That is a problem. In our church, actually, no one from the age of beyond, I'm probably the oldest one in my youth fellowship, because I'm trying to mentor them. None of our older youths provide a mentorship role to our younger youths. The average age in our youth Yuvajana Sakyam or Youth League at the moment is maybe 16 maximum, between 13 to 16. The rest, they either drop off uni, they move to a different place, and then anyone who's married off early or who gets married by the age of 28 or 26, none of them sit, because they see themselves as, we're no longer part of the youth league. No, there is no mentorship being carried through from the older to the younger one. And then already Glenn had mentioned a point about the first gen never stepping back. They're always in the forefront. And that is it's an unfortunate situation. We've not learned to step back.
Ashwin, can you conclude? Yeah.
No. I just want to. I agree to all the points that has been stated, Achin. And unfortunately, I think it will reach a point where grassroots will start to protest from downs. That then the church will have no control. I presume some churches might already have, but what happens is that the grassroots will start to bulldoze the church or church teaching.
Thank you. Ashwin. Reverend Abraham Kuruvula, you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Achin. I want to really thank everybody who are in the panel. I think I would just say in terms of solution, I think the models of Crossway and Redeemer are the possible solution for the future, and they are not perfect solutions. So let's get that straight. They are not perfect solution, but those are some solution. Rather than not attempting anything. I'm ministering at Crossway right now, and I am seeing the positivities of having such a model. We will say about compartmentalization, all those things, but we are doing something good in Crossway and Redeemer. And Ashwin's point, those are silent constructive protests from the grassroots and constructive protest, for the church. Some of the good things that are happening, I would like to share there. In terms of Crossway, and I also think Redeemer, they have this Bible studies where we go into the nitty-gritties of everyday family life. Now, imagine this in a typical Marthoma setting. If you share your transparent life details in a group, suddenly it becomes something for gossip or hearsay. Next Sunday, somebody comes, the senior generation will look at you, stare at you, saying that something is wrong with you. So these are some of the sensitivity points that happen in a typical Marthoma church, and it will never change because the cultural upbringing is like that. But within a Crossway or a Redeemer, since the generation is from second generation, they have the maturity. I won't say maturity, their upbringing is that they keep the transparency within that Bible study group. And like you are going into the nitty-gritties of family life, of everyday life, wherein the Bible is real to them. So that's one thing that's happening good in Crossway and Redeemer. Second thing that's good happening is the missional aspect. I think having served in a typical Marthoma church, missional aspect, I won't say it's not there. It happens once a year through Savior Sangam, through all the organization. But in Crossway and Redeemer, mission aspect are compartments at 3 levels: local, regional, global. And it happens once a month, if not once a week. Every month in these 2 churches, mission aspect, the young are able to relate to the local. Now we are studying on the Afghan refugees that are coming in to the US, and Redeemer as well as Crossway are investing in doing mission to the Afghan refugees, and Afghan refugees will be invited in our church and so imagine in a typical Marthoma church, if some Afghan refugees comes in, Idara, Indana, Evada, and so I think Crossway and Redeemer are not the possible good, perfect solution, but they are some of the solution. In terms of preaching, I heard, somebody say the spoken word cannot outgrow and the praise and worship cannot overtake the spoken word. We Achans, are not trained in preaching. Let us be honest. We are trained in preaching probably 4 hours in our 4 years. 4 hours, at least during my time. One Achan or one person will come and take a class for 4 hours. But here in the Western world, preaching is a sacrament. And, it takes a whole 4-year course on preaching. There are so many aspects of the skills of preaching. So until unless that happens, our preaching will be dependent on the charisma of the individual Achans. A lot of things to say, but I think these are some of the things. As Sam said, Marthoma Church will continue to exist in this land long after we are all gone. But it will be probably the immigrant Yuvajana Sakyam who are there. But the remnant will start going. So I think, we should really invest our energies in building models like Crossway and Redeemer all throughout. I do realize that there has been a mass exodus in Philadelphia, in Chicago, in New York, but whoever is there right now, we should invest our energy in creatively building this model, because there are positive things happening in these 2 churches. And I'm really proud that this 2 church continues to exist. Those are the solutions. Let's invest our time and energy in that solution. Thank you, Achan.
Thank you, Achan, for those comments. And I personally know that Crossway and Redeemer is the new models that our church experimented in US, and I personally think there would be more of those experiments in all over the world, and that would definitely help our church to continue the ministry in different parts of the world. I see the hands of Vinod Varghese. Vinod, are you there?
Yes, Achan, I'm there.
Okay.
I am at work. See me?
Yes.
Hi.
Please.
I'm at workplace. I'm just listening all the conversations. I'm just recently landed in the US since 1920.
You're not audible. Can you
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm a new immigrant in the US since last 1918. Around after spending my 27 years in North India, what the panelists and Achan said is exactly what I have seen in North India. I have seen like that older generation, they are not at all ready to back up the way for the new generations. Right now I'm in New York. The same thing I am doing, I am discussing with the younger generation, those who are not coming to a church. They are going back. Whatever the panelists said is correct. We have to include them in our church. And another thing what I have seen is the prayer groups. That is something lacking here, where we are building our new generation to, not for church, for fellowship. That where is something lacking. Only senior people are coming, no young people, no children. to children. There is no place for children or young people in the prayer group. That, in my opinion, this I want to put up here. If we strengthen our prayer group, our church will become very strong. Second thing, after 40 years, 50 years, let our migrant community back up and give that back into the young generation. Then only the life of Marthoma Church, not only Marthoma Church, other, Indian churches' life become easy in use. That's my opinion. Thank you, Achan.
Thank you, there is no specific question from Vinod, so let me call Jacob Atyal.
Thank you, Achan. Just before I go into my point, I just want to thank you for this forum. The speakers were fantastic, and it was one illuminating, and it's really exciting to be able to participate in a discussion like this. I want to echo what Abraham Kurvalachan just recently said. I'm 29 years old. I'm here in Los Angeles. I go to Marthoma Church every single Sunday. I'm not somebody that is completely interested in the older generation stepping back.
Can you speak a little more louder?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yes, I can. I'm not very excited about a focus on the older generation stepping back. I believe as someone who's younger, we have a lot to learn from the older generation, and there's the step back also takes away a lot of the positive aspects of the tradition of the Marthoma Church that, to me, I find incredibly appealing. The issue that I usually find isn't in as much how things are being said than what is being said. Currently, it feels a little bit like the Achans that are brought to, I can only speak to the US. The Achans that are brought to the US, it may seem a little bit like this is a present that is given to a number of Achans that maybe potentially do well in back in India or back in Kerala. You get the opportunity to come to be it the US, be it UK, be it Saudi, be it New Zealand, Australia. You get the chance to go abroad, your children to study abroad, and there's a lot of positive attributes and aspects behind that. The thing that gets lost is there's a certain cultural difference that happens here in the West. There's a certain idea when we go to our schools, when we go to our colleges, we don't see, I don't mean to open up a can of worms, but we don't see women as possibly taking a step back in leadership opportunities. We don't see certain cultural things that is a little more mainstream back in India than happens to be the case here. And so when those leaders are brought from there and speak at our pulpits here, I think there's just, there's a huge cavern that appears between the younger generation and those who are speaking from the pulpit. I think that is something that really needs to be considered before we bring those Achans here. It can either be we have Achans that are here already in the West, who grew up in the West, who happen to already understand a lot of these circumstances here, or just more of an interview process between the parishes here before those Achans are brought over to find out if these are people that can discuss complicated issues with the Sunday school kids, with the youth. I don't think this is a position where we're asking I can't say me, I'm not asking the older generation to step back at all. It's just a request for a greater exchange and a compromise between the older generation and the younger generation, that we can come together on a certain number of these issues. Something that I haven't really seen be an opportunity that is provided, a listening ear on both sides. This is both us as younger people need to be more aware and understanding of where others are coming from. And at the same time, if this is a priority for the Marthoma Church, if the younger generation is a priority, that they also think that maybe we can also have some discussions about the social aspects that us as youth consider extremely important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacob. I give time to Shiji.
Hi, Chakel Kamo.
Yes.
And so first of all, thank you for coordinating such a great webinar. So on and off Zoom, YouTube, I was able to watch pretty much almost 75 to 80% of this discussions. So, I know a couple of the speakers, and Sam is my good friend from Chicago. So we discuss all this all the time, because I don't want to ask a question like why youth are leaving the church. That is a question that I'm hearing when I stepped into the US from 2006. So I'm a first generation mom of a 21-year-old daughter. And I was a parish secretary in Chicago Marthoma Church in the past 2 years. So I heard from women leadership. So in this such a patriarchal community, and with this whatever we called bylaws, with those two, like I would say, like it's very difficult for a woman to step up and work in this. So somebody has to have that very much into personal conviction and some dedication to work on this, because I know that how much hard for me to manage the church and my house life and my work, because it is everybody is from all the sides try to find fault in you. Like, let me say an example. If you send an email at work, and if that was a mistake, and you will send an email like, apologies, please disregard my previous email. Nobody will come back to you with questions asking why you did a mistake. But if you send us in the church, for next 3 months, people will make fun of you. But in that spot, which youth want to come there? No one want to come there, because my kids will tell, Mommy, this is cyberbullying. So they don't want to come and take up a leadership position in our churches. And in Sunday school, I'm teaching 12th grade. So it was so difficult. I took maybe 10 years to realize the culture here. So how much more an action coming for 3 years to understand what these kids are going through? Because in 2006, I came, my daughter was only 10. Then I thought I will be making sure that she will speak Malayalam. She will be growing as an Indian Kerala child in here. പിന്നെ എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായത് കറിവേപ്പില വീടിനകത്ത് വെളുക്കുന്നത് പോലെ I cannot make a Kerala in America, because these kids are going to schools where there is heterogeneous community there. I would say in back home, what they see, we saw only nuclear family and a joint family. Here, gay families, lesbian families, transgenders, blended families, single parents, foster parents, all these kids are in one class. So our kids are mixing with them. So if our generation, including my generation, try to understand the problem of these children, and the church is courageous to address this. If there is a problem in the church, like for example, on the transgender issues or Black Lives Matter issue, if the church is making a stand and trying to stay with the kids, and they are not addressing this, every question, every webinars, every discussions, it doesn't make any sense unless we are moving. So who is going to move that? We don't know who will move the needle. So that's it's my concern. I hope that one day something will happen and our kids will come back to our churches. So as a mom, I am hoping and praying for that. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Shiji. The last person to discuss, to have a question is Nainan Thomas.
Yeah, my name is Nainan. I'm from Perth. I also was headmaster for my Sunday school in Perth. Just some few observations. I'll try and make it as short as possible. First of all, thank you for organizing this. At least we have, we are taking it seriously. And right now, it sounds a lot pessimistic, and there's no hope, etc., etc. America seems to be a big problem, but in every problem, I feel there's an opportunity as well. To start off, the problems that we are having in these places in America or rest of the world is just our problems from Kerala overflowing into these countries. Because the basic problem is our lack of focus in the word back in Kerala itself. So if a parent is word-based and comes to America, nothing is going to happen to his or her child who is also word-based. They will be able to stand up to the challenges. And secondly, so Reggie, who shared the presentation, is a typical example. So he is able to teach Sunday school, and he is a very good role model in Sydney, and he is able to take the next generation on and help them with all that they are facing. And Raji is a typical example of a well brought up child who was born up in a family which is word based. So we need to stick to our basic fundamentals. Marthoma Church is strong in the word and in prayer. So if we can build up on these things in these places, there is a lot of hope, is what I feel. Couple of things which we have to straight away address is, one, address the problems that are current in the with the word of God as a base. Amidst our worship, amidst our discussions, do not run away from the burning topics that are prevalent and just keep on giving watered down sermons. So, and also the other thing is, Achans cannot by themselves run the full responsibilities of the parishes, because the responsibilities are huge. There are people requiring prayer, there are people requiring counseling, people are having various issues. Achans need to take the support of the dependable leaders in the parish itself. In that, many Achans are feeling insecure about sharing his or her responsibility.
Can you conclude?
Yes. So the basic thing is stick to our roots, work on the roots, which is the word of God, and use the talent in the church to strengthen the existing system and work on. So there is ample hope in there.
Thank you.
I want to make a quick comment. I just want to make a quick comment, not even 1 minute. No, okay. I'm surprised that nobody has brought up the issue of the role of women in our churches. And there is a very burning issue that was raised from the Boston Marthoma Church. I'm so surprised that nobody brought it up. That's all. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. If any of the panelists want to respond, you can take 1 minute. Only 1 minute, please.
Achan, this is George Verghese.
Yes.
There is a lot of points being raised here. We can't answer everything right now. But one thing I will say, that as a church, Marthoma Church, the senior leaders need to decide in 25 years' time where this Marthoma Church want to go. What is our vision in long term? Do we want to stay as a Marthoma Church of Kerala root, or do we want to establish this as a global church? So if we want to go in that direction, then all these questions comes out. If they don't want to go in that direction, then half of these questions are invalid.
Thank you. I think Mr. George Verghese is in the Sabha Council, so I would request you to take these issues positively and present it there. I think that will make some difference. Any other panelists?
Even not necessarily talking about the second generation who is moving away, even within the first generation, I was observing the fact that at the level of the church, the central, there is no space for seniors. There's the youth group, there's Xavier Sangam, there's young families, there's all kinds of things, but there are no places for seniors. They are not represented on church committees, except of course with the generous support of the Achins for the local committee. But where are the seniors? They are the ones who came and established the churches, except unless of course they put themselves forward for official positions. Is there a seniors group in each of the churches? So there are issues not only at the second generation level, but also at the very systemic level of this church institution.
Thank you, Dr. Usha. Anyone else from the panel?
Ajay, this is Shiji. There is a question in the chat box from one of the panelists. What are the reasons why American-born raised Achins are leaving the church?
I don't know the reason. There may be, like Sam did the survey, there should be a survey to ask why are you leaving your own church where you're ordained? there are many other issues in that line. I do not know. I do not want to answer those questions. Anyway.
How many have? How many have? I know 2. Are there many?
Anyway, thank you all for the discussion. We have to wind up. It's already 2.5 hours. I think it's too long, but we have raised many serious issues, and we all love our church. I love my church. I think you all love our church. That is why you are all here. And we want our children also to love our church and continue with the church. And I think for that, we all have to contribute to make this church relevant for the next generations. So thank you all. I give
one more person in the queue. One more person in the queue, Mr. Abraham Jacob.
I think we have stopped. We have concluded the discussion. That is why I do not want to extend time. I'm sorry, Mr. Abraham Jacob. Can I give time for
is there going to be an
Mr. P.O. Sunny to conclude with the announcement?
Yes, വളരെ ഗംഭീരമായിട്ടുള്ള ചർച്ചകൾ നടന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയായിരുന്നല്ലോ. എല്ലാവരോടും ഉള്ള പ്രത്യേകമായിട്ടുള്ള കൃതജ്ഞത അച്ഛൻ അറിയിക്കും. ഞാൻ ഈ സമയത്ത് ഇത്തരത്തിലുള്ള ഒരു വെബിനാർ ക്രമീകരിക്കുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടി ഡയസ്പോറ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള അവിടുത്തെ ചർച്ചസിന്റെ പാരിഷസിന്റെ വ്യത്യസ്തങ്ങളായിട്ടുള്ള ഇഷ്യൂസ് നമുക്ക് അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള ഈ വെബിനാർ ക്രമീകരിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് നമ്മളെ ഏറെ സഹായിച്ചത് ഓസ്ട്രേലിയയിൽ നിന്നുള്ള കുരുവിള മാത്യു സാറാണ്. സാറിന്റെ സേവനങ്ങളെ ഈ സമയത്ത് ഞാൻ നന്ദിയോടെ സ്മരിക്കുന്നു. ഈ ദർശനവേദിയുടെ ഈ 27ാമത്തെ വെബിനാർ വളരെ വ്യത്യസ്തമായിട്ടുള്ള രീതിയിൽ ക്രമീകരിക്കുന്നതിന് സാധിച്ചതിൽ വളരെയേറെ സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്. നമ്മളുടെ അടുത്ത പ്രോഗ്രാം നവംബർ മാസം 19-ാം തീയതി ഫ്രൈഡേ ഈവനിങ് 8 o'clock-നാണ് നമ്മൾ ക്രമീകരിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. ഡൽഹിയിൽ നടന്നുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന കാർഷിക സമരത്തിന്റെ പശ്ചാത്തലത്തിൽ കാർഷിക സമരം 1 വർഷം പിന്നിടുകയാണ്. നവംബർ മാസം 26-ാം തീയതി 1 വർഷം പിന്നിടുകയാണ്. ആ കാർഷിക സമരത്തിന്റെ പശ്ചാത്തലത്തിൽ കർഷകരോടുള്ള ഐക്യദാർഢ്യ സൂചകമായി നാം ഒരു സമരമുഖത്ത് നിൽക്കുന്ന വിജു കൃഷ്ണൻ നേതൃത്വം നൽകുന്ന ഒരു വെബിനാർ ആയിരിക്കും നമുക്ക് അടുത്ത നവംബർ മാസം 19-ാം തീയതി ക്രമീകരിക്കുന്നത്. ഓൾ ഇന്ത്യ കിസാൻ സഭയുടെ ജോയിന്റ് സെക്രട്ടറിയാണ് വിജു കൃഷ്ണനും അതേപോലെ തന്നെ സമരമുഖത്ത് നിൽക്കുന്ന ഏതാനും പേരെയും കൂടി നമ്മളുടെ ആ വെബിനാറിൽ ക്രമീകരിക്കുവാനായിട്ട് ലീഡേഴ്സായിട്ട് ക്രമീകരിക്കുവാനായിട്ട് ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. നിങ്ങളെ എല്ലാവരെയും ആ വെബിനാറിലേക്ക് ഞാൻ സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇന്നത്തെ ഈ വെബിനാറിന്റെ തുടർന്നുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട VM മാത്യു അച്ഛൻ കൺക്ലൂഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ്. താങ്ക് യു വെരി മച്ച്.
I just want to thank all the presenters for their efforts and their time that they spent to present their papers in this webinar. I thank Mr. George Verghese, Dr. Reggie Matthew, Dr. Usha George, Suma Chako, and Dr. Sam George for their wonderful presentations. I personally think that it will benefit the church in the coming days, and these voices will be heard in the decision-making bodies. So I want to thank all our presenters. I want to thank everyone who are with us, all the respected Achins, all the people who participated in the discussions, and all those who are with us from different time zones. Thank you so much for being part of this. Can I request Reverend Dr. K. Abraham Achin to close with a word of prayer and benediction? Achin, are you here?
Yes. കേൾക്കാമോ?
Yes, Achin.
പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കാം. പ്രിയ കർത്താവേ, സ്വർഗസ്വപിതാവേ, മാതൃമാ ദർശനവേദിയിലൂടെ ലഭ്യമാകുന്ന നന്മകൾക്കായി അനുഗ്രഹങ്ങൾക്കായി സ്തോത്രം. ഇന്നത്തെ വെബിനാറിൽ വ്യാപരിച്ച കൃപയ്ക്കായി സ്തുതിക്കുന്നു. സംസാരിച്ച മക്കൾക്കായി സ്തോത്രം. എല്ലാ നല്ല കൺസേൺസിനായി ഞങ്ങളങ്ങേ സ്തുതിക്കുന്നു. ഞങ്ങളുടെ സഭയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടി പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. ദർശനമുള്ള ദൗത്യബോധമുള്ള സഭയായി ജീവിക്കുവാനിടയാക്കണമേ. ഇതിൽ പങ്കെടുത്ത മക്കളെ എല്ലാവരെയും വാഴ്ത്തണമേ. പ്രവർത്തന മേഖലകളെ അനുഗ്രഹിക്കണമേ. അവിടുത്തെ നൽവരങ്ങളാൽ ഞങ്ങളെ നിറയ്ക്കണമേ. യേശുവിൻ നാമത്തിൽ അപേക്ഷിക്കുന്നു, കൃപയുണ്ടായി കേൾക്കണമേ. ആമേൻ. ത്രിയേക ദൈവത്തിന്റെ കൃപ, അനുഗ്രഹം, ആശീർവാദം നാം എല്ലാവരോടും കൂടെ എപ്പോഴും ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കുമാറാകട്ടെ. ആമേൻ.
Thank you all. Good night and good morning.
Well organized, well done. Thank you so much.
ഇത് കാനഡയിൽ നിന്നുള്ള തമ്പിയാണോ?
തമ്പിയാണോ? അതെ.
കെ ബ്രാഹ്മച്ചനാ.
അച്ഛനെ മീശ വളർത്തിയത് കൊണ്ട് എനിക്ക് പെട്ടെന്ന് പിടിയിട്ടില്ല. ഇവിടെ ഇരുന്നപ്പോഴത്തെ നല്ല ഓർമ്മകളൊക്കെ ഉണ്ട് അച്ഛോ. വണ്ടർഫുൾ എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ്. അച്ഛൻ അടുത്തൊരു പാനലിൽ ഇതിനെ കുറിച്ച് സംസാരിക്കും. ഞാൻ കൈ ഉയർത്തിയെങ്കിലും കണ്ടില്ല, അതുകൊണ്ട് പറഞ്ഞില്ല. ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ 71 മുതലുള്ള വ്യക്തിയാണെന്ന് അച്ഛൻ അറിയാമല്ലോ. ഉഷ അതിനുവേണ്ടി സംസാരിച്ചു. ഉഷ ലാസ്റ്റിൽ പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു പോയിന്റ് ഒരു ശേഖരം എംഫസൈസ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ളൂ. 70 പ്രായമുള്ളവർക്ക് വേണ്ടി, ഇത് സെക്കൻഡ് ജനറേഷന് വേണ്ടി മാത്രമല്ല ഈ കൺസേൺ. There is a struggle going on in every parish, the fights we can call it in an exaggerated way. What is the role of seniors? I mean, anybody over 60, let us say, in the church now. They are, ഞങ്ങളെ അടുപ്പിക്കുകയെന്നുള്ള സംസാരങ്ങൾ പല പള്ളികളിലും കേട്ടു തുടങ്ങി. എല്ലാവർക്കും വേണ്ടി പറഞ്ഞതേ ഉള്ളൂ. അത് ശരിയല്ല, ദൈവഹിതമല്ല, അതൊരു അനുഗ്രഹമല്ല. കാരണം ഈ വീട് പണിതവനെ അകത്തോട്ട് കയറ്റുകയല്ല എന്ന് പറയുന്ന പോലാണ് അതിന്റെ. അത് നമ്മള് എത്ര വർഷം മുമ്പ് വന്നു എന്നുള്ളതല്ല. ദർ ആർ ഫണ്ടമെന്റൽ തിങ്സ്. നമ്മുടെ അപ്പനെ ബഹുമാനിക്കുക, അമ്മയും ബഹുമാനിക്കുക. വി ഹാവ് ടു റെസ്പെക്ട്. പിന്നെ ഈ തല നരച്ചത് കൊണ്ട് കഴിവ് കുറഞ്ഞിട്ടില്ലല്ലോ.